Hi, my name is Michelle Daughter. I'm the editor-in-chief of Design Books, and I'm here to talk to you about publishing from all angles. So if you're thinking about publishing your book, there are a lot of different ways you can do that and great reasons to use all of those methods. The important thing is that you go into it with intentionality and with all the right knowledge. So we're going to see if we can get you that. Hang on while I get my PowerPoint going here. All right, so if you're thinking about publishing your book, there are three basic options, right? First is publishing with the big five or the other titans. These are the big traditional presses. You might recognize some of these names from your bookshelf. Penguin Random House, Hachette, HarperCollins, Simon & Schuster, and Macmillan and their imprints are technically the big five. This category also covers presses like HMH, Scholastic, Disney, and Amazon, which are enormous. All right, you also have independent, university, and small presses. Independent presses is just a term for anything that is not affiliated with the big five presses or the other enormous presses. University presses, pretty self-explanatory. Small presses can be anything from Grey Wolf, which is actually pretty big, down to the micro presses that might do 2 or 3 titles a year and have 3 volunteers on staff. So as you can see from this list, there's a wide variety of publishers here, things like Chronicle, Grey Wolf Coffee House that you might have heard of and have probably read books by, down to smaller presses like Jollyfish, Outpost 19, and you can see Desank is right at the very end. Self-publishing is the last general option, a lot of different ways to do that, but you will be the force behind it and everything starts and stops with you. So if you're thinking about where and how you want to publish your book, there are a few critical questions that you're probably going to be mulling over. How do I approach this kind of publishing? How hard is it to get picked up? How does the money work? What can I expect in terms of marketing support? How much creative control will I have and how long will it take? And there's a lot of great information out there about all of these forms of publishing, but sometimes it can be hard to get straight answers to these questions. So we're just going to hit them one at a time and cover each of these 3 options. All right, so how do I approach fill-in-the-blank publishing? With the big presses, you will almost unilaterally need an agent, all right? Almost none of the big presses take unagented submissions anymore, except occasionally when they have specific calls for a certain kind of fiction. With the small presses, the indie presses, you're going to see a lot more variety. Some of them still ask for agented submissions. Many of them take agented and unagented submissions, or they only acquire through contests or in certain open submission periods throughout the year. If you're thinking about indie presses, make sure that you check their submission guidelines. Don't be sending your book when nobody wants to see it. It won't get you anywhere. All right. With self-publishing, right? Everything begins and ends with you, like we said. But that's not to say that you shouldn't go into this decision informed. So you want to research competing platforms, decide exactly how you're going to be self-publishing, make a budget and a plan, decide what you can take on and when. How hard is it to get picked up? At the big presses, it's pretty hard. Less than 1% of all manuscripts submitted to the big presses will eventually be acquired. And take into account that these submissions are pretty much all agented already. There's a lot of competition even just to be agented. With the indie presses, it's still very selective. A lot of indie presses are more open to unagented submissions, but many of them publish a smaller list, so they're acquiring fewer books per year than the big presses are. Niche projects that specifically fit into a publisher's goals are going to have a better shot. So if you can find a publisher that's really interested in avant-garde or experimental poetry, and that's the manuscript you're pushing, you're going to have a much better chance. All right, self-publishing. There are no barriers to publishing, right? This is something you can do all on your own, but keep in mind that it can be a challenge to stand out from the crowd. There are a lot of books self-published every year. So think about how you're going to distinguish yourself and your work and reach your audience. How does the money work? Probably the big question on everybody's mind. With the big presses, what you're usually going to see is a traditional advance and royalty payment structure. So we're going to talk about this a little bit in detail. An advance is the money that your publisher gives you when they sign the contract. This is money that your publisher is gambling on you. They believe your book is going to sell and they're giving you this up front so you continue to live and pay your rent and feed yourself while you're working on your book. You never have to pay back the advance, whether or not your book earns out. The royalty payments are the money that you make off of the sales of each individual copy of the book. And you can see I've put the traditional percentages in here. It's usually 10% of a hardcover price and 7.5% of paperback price. So think about the fact that if you're selling a hardcover for $25, the author is going to see $2.50 for each copy sold, right? Royalty payment structures, you make royalty money once you have earned out your advance. So before that point, you're not going to see anything new from the publisher. Royalty payments are also sometimes done on an escalator system. So after you hit a certain number of copies, 5,000 for example, your royalty percentage for the hardcover might move up to 12.5%. After another 5,000 copies, maybe 15%. So that's where you can start really raking in the money. Also bear in mind that a lot of big presses will be selling subsidiary rights. Okay, so that's audio, performance, which is film and TV, translation, anything else they can get their hands on, merchandising, and that can bring in additional money. With the indie presses, you're still often looking at an advance and a typical royalty structure. If they offer advances, these will generally be smaller, anywhere between $500 and $15,000. Swoon Reads is one that I know of that offers a standard $10,000 advance on all projects picked up. Other presses won't offer any advance at all. If they don't offer an advance, usually you'll be working on a different royalty structure, generally 50% net, which means that of all the money that comes in, after certain expenses spelled out in your contract are taken out, you receive 50% and the publisher gets the other half. Self-publishing, right? There's no advance. You're doing this yourself, so nobody's paying you up front. Your income is dependent on your sales offset by your production costs. So as you're making your plan and you're thinking about how much you're going to budget for promotion, for editing, for design work, think about the fact that that money comes out up front, and then income depends on the sales. All right, how do production and marketing work? With the big presses, these are big engines with a lot of moving parts, right? So there are editors, there are publicists, there are production assistants, there are people who just do the covers. You can expect assistance with editing, typesetting, graphic design, cover design, printing, distribution, and advanced reader copies. So all of these are the bread and butter of the traditional publishers. All big presses do have a marketing and publicity department, but not all authors get the same amount of attention, right? One of the misconceptions about big press publishing is that you will get the red carpet rolled out for you, no matter what your book is. A general rule of thumb is that about 20% of the authors get 80% of the marketing budget, because at the big presses specifically, the top sellers, the best sellers, pay for the rest of the list. So you will have certain marketing and publicity support. Publishing with a big press won't necessarily be as big as you're imagining, the national tour. All right, because these are big engines, publishing with big presses can be terrific. Sometimes it can feel a little impersonal. If you feel like you're just a cog in the wheel, you don't feel like you have a specific advocate at the press. This is one of the reasons that some authors prefer to work with indie or university presses instead. How do production and marketing work at the indie presses? These are smaller staffs with a strong mission. Indie publishing is an act of love, okay? No one is getting rich off of this because there is no money in it. Because these are smaller, more dedicated staffs, you can be guaranteed that you are going to have people who care deeply about your book and love it, or they wouldn't have picked it up. You can also expect assistance with editing, typesetting, graphic design, cover design, printing, distribution, and advanced reader copies at the indie presses. The usually in parentheses there is because some indie presses won't be able to do as many advanced reader copies as you'd see with the big presses, or they might do E-only advanced reader copies. There are fewer resources for marketing and promotion. So if you think about those huge publicity engines that are working for you at the big presses, they're going to be smaller here. You'll get more personal attention and more collaboration, but because there are fewer resources, you're going to need to play a much bigger role as well, both in helping getting the word out there about your book through your platform or through conferences or doing appearances, helping compose things like jacket copy, coming up with places that might review your book, all those little tasks that might be taken care of by a publicity staff at a big press. All right, production and marketing with self-publishing, right? This is all up to you. You get to do this at whatever level or amount you want to do. Okay, to publish a professional quality product, you might need to employ beta readers, find a critique group or a freelance editor or someone else who can help you make sure that the text of your book is pitch perfect. You may need to look into getting professional cover design or interior design unless you're really good at those things. And you are going to need to decide whether you're offering only a digital version, physical versions as well, whether you're able to ship internationally, and a lot of other decisions that would be made for you at the traditional presses. Marketing and promotion is going to be dependent on your budget, platform, and reach. Okay, it's going to be up to you to decide how many ads you want to run, if you want to run any, what other kinds of promotion you might do, if you can appear at conferences, if you can find other avenues through which to promote your book. So you're going to need to build your own platform, figure out where your readers are and how you want to reach them. So you need to know your audience and your genre and be reaching specifically for the readers who are interested in your book. All right. Just keep in mind that some marketing channels aren't set up with self-publishing in mind. So certain review services, such as some of the trade reviews, Shelf Awareness, for example, may not be available to self-published authors. Certain conferences won't necessarily take self-published authors as speakers or panelists, and some awards are not set up for self-published books. Others are. Forward Reviews, for example, is a site that does a ton of reviews for independently self-published books, and there are other awards that are specifically geared towards self-publishing. All right, how much control will you have? At the big presses, you will have more control at the editorial stage, but very little over cover design, marketing, and so on. Okay, the editorial stage is a partnership. You should be collaborating with an editor who has a vision that aligns with your vision for your book. There are certain edits that may be non-negotiable, but if so, an editor should have discussed those with you when your book was acquired. They're not going to try to blindside you and force you to change your book at the last minute unless they get overwhelming input from the sales folks. Okay. That is not true of the cover design, okay, or the marketing slant. These are entirely sales factors, and the cover can even be changed based on retailer feedback. So if a big press presents a book to Barnes & Noble or Target or Costco, and they say, we're not going to stock this book unless it has more glitter on the cover, you can bet that book is going to have a glitterier cover when it comes out, okay? So this is a sales engine, and it will do exactly what it needs to do to sell the book. So you can voice an objection, just be prepared that you may not really have much say in that side of things. At the indie presses, you're going to have more input into the cover and the marketing approaches. The editing, again, this will be a collaboration and a partnership. When it comes to cover, marketing, promotion, all of that, ultimately the final decisions will likely be made by other people. Okay, these are smaller staffs. So if you have a concern, something that you feel like the book is really being pointed in the wrong direction, you can express that and you'll be taken seriously. But a lot of indie presses do have sales forces or distributors who are trying to help them get their books out there into the broader market. So if they say that this cover does not say memoir, probably going to put a different cover on it. All right, self-publishing, you have all of the control. You can do anything you want, but with great power comes great responsibility. You do not necessarily have expert advice, right? So think about getting a professional cover design or professional typesetting, or at the very least, getting professional eyes or reader eyes on your cover before it goes live. Don't necessarily let your 5-year-old crayon your cover unless that really makes sense for the book that you're publishing. Will my books be in stores? All right, with the big presses, yeah, absolutely. Big presses have a big distribution network, and they tend to have good reach with libraries too. So you can expect to see your books in a ton of stores, probably not every store nationwide, right? But all your local stores and any other store where it makes a lot of sense for the audience of your book, right? Indie presses, yeah, for the most part. Indie press books, depending on the size of the press, will be either in stores or will be available for order. Not all Dzanc books are carried in Barnes & Noble, but you can always order them to a Barnes & Noble, right? And how widely available those books are will depend on the press and the size of the book, as well as their distribution system, okay? Note that not all indie presses have wide distribution. So if it's really important to you that your book can be ordered in indie stores or by libraries or wholesale by Amazon, make sure that you look into an indie press's distribution network and method before you sign with them. Right. And finally, self-publishing. Yes, your self-published book can be in stores if you work at it, right? You're going to need to convince booksellers to stock it. So you can approach your local Barnes & Noble or other national chains. You can approach indie booksellers and tell them why you think your book might be appropriate for the audience that they see in their store. Indie booksellers are amazing, wonderful people. They care a lot about their local community and their local authors, so that might be a good place to start. All right, finally, how long does this whole process take? All right. With the big presses, practically forever. All right. You've probably heard the Cinderella stories about a book that goes out on submission to agents and gets picked up in a week. And then it goes out on submission to presses and gets picked up in 3 weeks, right? So after a month, you have a huge publishing deal. That happens to almost nobody. But even if that happened to you, right, you would still probably be waiting about 2 years for your book to come out. Most big presses acquire books on an 18-month or 24-month lead time. This is not necessarily true if you're a returning author who's published with them before, but especially if you're a new author, there's probably going to be some lead time built in, and that can be really important time. Big presses, for the most part, use it to focus on promotion, and that's how they get your book out there everywhere, right? If it takes longer at the agent submission stage, like it does for most people, if it takes longer at submitting to editors, which it does for most people, you could be looking at more like 5 years to have this book come out. All right, indie presses. It still takes longer than you'd think. A lot of indie presses are able to publish faster because they're fleeter. We published a book this last spring that we acquired last August. So that was about an 11-month publishing process for us. That is the fastest we have ever done that. I don't think we'll ever do it again. It was intense to try to get that book the attention that it deserved in such a short time frame. A lot of small presses will still be acquiring a book on a 12 to 18-month lead time, okay? And bear in mind that some small presses read really slowly. We read really fast sometimes of the year. Sometimes of the year we're just crawling. So you need to think about that as well when you're thinking about how long this will take. I will note that presses that are e-only or e-first, so if they're doing digital copies first and waiting to see how well it sells before they do print copies, or if they're digital only, they tend to be even faster. So you're going to be acquired, and then you might be able to see your book in somewhere between 6 to 9 months, okay? But you still have some lead time built in there, and that's important. That's how you get that interest up among your target readers before your book just kind of lands on the scene. All right? Self-publishing, publish at your own discretion and on your own schedule, right? You can finish your manuscript and hit publish on Kindle Unlimited the next day. Maybe don't. We'll talk about that in a minute. If you decide that you want to get a professional editor or a professional cover, professional design before you go out there, or build a little bit of your platform, make sure that you're reaching your readers before your book goes live, that can take a little longer. So this is totally at your own discretion. If you're thinking about wanting to publish multiple books a year and you're in a genre where that makes sense, romance is the one that comes to mind. Self-publishing might make sense for that. You have a lot more control over when your book drops. Okay, so now you've got all this information on myriad topics. How do you know what's actually right for your project? A couple of questions to keep in mind, all right? What is your genre and market? Certain genres of book just don't make sense for certain kinds of presses, okay? Your very experimental poetry book that has a poem in the middle in wingdings just may not get picked up by HarperCollins, okay? So thinking about your genre and the market for your book will help guide you. How saleable is your book? This is a big part of it too, right? Those bigger presses, they're commercial engines. So almost everything that they acquire, they will be expecting to sell. If your book fits into a commercial genre that does a lot of moves a lot of books, might be a project that's very interesting to a big press. If it's something that's more niche, you might be looking at more of an indie press situation, a press that might take a chance on a riskier book or a book that isn't guaranteed to sell because they think it's amazing, right? And finally, what does success look like to you? Are you really looking for the experience where you're going to be a household name and your book's going to be in every grocery store and Costco across the country? Glittery cover be damned. Or are you looking for a smaller staff who's going to be very invested in you and in your book and that more personalized experience that might fit alongside a career in academics or something else that you're doing? Are you looking for a publishing experience where everything is completely within your own control and you don't have to compromise your creative vision at any stage because of commercial interests or who wants the cover to look like what? All of these should lead you toward the right path for your project. And remember that not every project you do will necessarily have the same stakes, same genre, the same market or commercial aspects. So you can make this decision differently every time you finish a book. If you're not sure where you want to go or you're a little torn, consider starting from the highest level that you'd like to achieve. We had an author a few years ago who sent his book to us. We loved it and we made an offer on it. When we made that offer, he decided that maybe the book had commercial New York house, big press publishing potential. So he withdrew from the offer and took it and tried to go the big press route. And I really hope that worked out for him. If I had been able to talk to him before he submitted, I would have recommended submitting to the big presses first. Don't cut yourself off from opportunities where you've gotten an opportunity from a small press, but you're not totally sure that you don't want to go with a bigger press and you haven't gotten the chance to see if you have that opportunity. Right? Okay, here's my personal note, the case against publishing as fast as you can. So you've finished a book and you're really excited to get it out there in the world. Don't just hit publish on Kindle Unlimited until you've thought about a few of these things and made sure you're making the right decision for you and for this book. Each book can only be published once, right? Most publishers will not be interested in a book that has been previously self-published. I get requests every year from authors asking if we'll take a look at a book that's been previously self-published and whether we might be interested in it. And for the most part, the answer is just no. If your book sells 1 million copies at the self-published level, or if you win a big award, or in some other way your profile becomes really big, you might get a press that's interested in it. But if you've self-published, the book is already out there in the world. It can be hard to pull it back, and sometimes the rights are owned by Amazon in a way that's tough to disentangle. So make sure before you self-publish a book that that's what you want to do with it, because once it's self-published, that's probably where it'll stay. Right? Make sure you're ready and you've considered your options. Don't publish a book before you've had time to edit it and review it and sit with it and make sure that it is the book you want out there and the book that you can be proud of. Right? If you don't just want to be published, you want to be published well. And that's true at every level, whether it's big presses or the small press that's perfect for this project, or self-publishing with exactly the cover, exactly the book that you want. Don't just throw your work out there. You've worked so hard on this. You deserve more than to just kind of throw it out there and see what happens to it. Okay, thank you for sticking with me. I know this was kind of a long presentation. It's a lot of information, and publishing can be daunting, regardless of what kind you're taking on. If you need more information, there's a lot of information out there about every form of publishing. And I'm around. You can come find me if you have questions that you need answered. Stick with it, stay strong. I know this has been a weird conference, and I hope to get the opportunity to talk to all of you sometime in person down the road. So good luck, and I hope this has been helpful.